Shalom, everyone. Josh here, excited to be talking with you again today from this week's Torah portion. Before I do, just a quick word about why I do these and why I do any biblical or spiritual teaching at all. And it's for one purpose. It's that we might know God, right? God is knowable. Is he completely knowable? Are we always ever going to know everything about God? Of course not. But he is knowable in a very real sense. There's the meeting of personalities, right? The highest form of relationship is between two personalities, right? Or at least it should be. If my love for an inanimate object is higher than my love for my wife, that's a sin. That's not right. There's something wrong about that. Our highest love should be towards that which has personality. So for some reason, in certain forms of spirituality, to not see God as having personhood or being able to make choice, or to see ourselves as one with God, not just being unified with God, but actually being the same as God. They see that as a higher form of spirituality when it's really not, because that demotes God as a person, not meaning ultimately that he's a human being, although he did take on flesh to save us in Yeshua, our Messiah. But God in his being is a person, meaning he has personality, which means you can get to know him, which means you can be loved by him. You're being loved by something above you, something other than you, but something that wants to know you and be known by you. That's the reason for why I teach, to know God and to hopefully encourage others to know God more deeply. In this week's Torah portion, we talk about, or we read about the fellowship offering, the peace offering. Depends on which translation you're reading, but it's an offering that's brought to God, and zevach is the offering part. Now, the word used to describe this particular offering comes from the same root as the word shalom, which means peace. But in Hebrew, this shalom doesn't just mean a cessation of war or there's no strife. It means there's a wholeness, there's a completeness about it. And I believe that, and there's a little bit of debate about does it exactly mean in this case. Does it mean that the one who's offering is offering from a state of being complete, being well? It's not a sin offering. It's not, it's not a guilt offering, but it's just, I'm doing well and I want to bring an offering to say thanks, I'm well to God. And that's possible. But I actually side with those scholars that believe that the word shalom here is talking about the relationship between the offerer and God. Okay? Now, this week's Torah portion actually begins in Leviticus 6. The fellowship offering is talked about in chapter 7. But before that, it's actually talked about in chapter 3, Leviticus chapter 3. And in fact, the whole chapter is about this type of offering, and it's about how it's done. This is what you do if you bring the fellowship offering. This is what's different about it if you bring a lamb. This is what's different about it if you bring a goat. But I just want to point out a couple things from this chapter. So going back to chapter 3, last week's Torah portion. Now, if the offering is a sacrifice of fellowship offering, if from the herd, whether male or female, he is to offer one without blemish before Adonai. Okay, so it needs to be a perfect offering. You don't bring the lame lamb. You don't bring the speckled goat. You bring what's beautiful and right before the Lord. The second thing, verse 2, he shall lay his hand on the head of his offering and slaughter it at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Then Aaron's sons, the Kohanim, are to splash the blood around on the altar. So first part of that verse, the offerer himself lays his hands on the animal's head, and slaughters it himself. This is not an offering where you just sit back and watch. This is one where you participate in it. And the third thing from these two verses is that the importance of the blood. The blood is splashed around on the altar. And we see the importance of blood for atonement throughout Leviticus, okay? Those who say, oh, the blood's not important, you're having to gut quite a bit out of Torah. That just do a word search on blood, and you'll see how often blood is associated with atonement in the Torah. So let's keep in mind those three things, okay? First of all, a perfect offering. Okay, second of all, an offering in which one is intimately involved. You actually lay your hand on the sacrifice and slaughter it yourself. And the third thing is the importance of the blood for this. Now let's go to this week's Torah portion. We're just going to look at chapter 7 a little bit, and we're going to start at verse 11. Now this is the Torah, or this is the instruction, of the sacrifice of fellowship offerings, which may be offered to Adonai. If he brings it for a thanksgiving, then he is to present with the sacrifice of thanksgiving matzah, cakes mixed with oil. In other words, unleavened bread is to accompany the animal sacrifice. Matzah wafers anointed with oil and fine flour cakes mixed with oil. He is to present his offering with the sacrifice of his fellowship offerings for thanksgiving, along with cakes of bread with chametz, with leavening here, okay? From each he is to offer one out of every offering as a gift to Adonai. Okay, so part of this offering goes to the Lord. It will belong to the Kohen who sprinkles the blood of the fellowship offerings. Okay, so in giving it to the priest, it's a way of giving it to the Lord. The meat of the sacrifice of his fellowship offering for thanksgiving is to be eaten on the day of his offering. He is not to leave any of it until the morning. Now, from these two chapters, chapter 3 and chapter 7, we realize that really three different parties partake of this sacrifice. So let me go back to chapter 3 for a second, and we're going to see here that the Lord partakes in it, and that is, let's take a look at verse 11. Verse 11, it says, if his offering is a goat, that's verse 12. Verse 11, the Kohen is to burn it up as smoke on the altar as a food offering made by fire to Adonai. A food offering made by fire to Adonai, okay? It's like food to the Lord, okay? Now, the Lord doesn't have a body. He's not actually eating this sacrifice, but the Lord is partaking of it. The burning it up, the smoke going up, the Lord is receiving that as if being fed almost, right? The Lord is partaking in this meal. And we see the same thing in verse 16. The Kohen is to burn them on the altar. So here it's talking about the offering, if it's a goat, whether it's a lamb, verse 11, or whether it's a goat, verse 16, same thing. The Kohen is to burn them on the altar. It is the food of the offering made by fire for a soothing aroma. All fat is for Adonai. The Lord partakes of this offering, okay? Now, I already read that also in offering to the Lord, the priest partakes of it, okay? So back in chapter 7 there, verse 14, from each he is to offer one out of every offering as a gift to Adonai. It will belong to the Kohen. It will belong to the priest who sprinkles the blood of the fellowship offerings. The one who sprinkles the blood gets to also eat of this. Okay, so we have the Lord partaking of this. We have one of the priests partaking of this. And then if we go to verse 15, the meat of the sacrifice of his fellowship offering for thanksgiving is to be eaten on the day of his offering. He is not to leave any of it until morning. It's to be eaten by whom? It's to be eaten by the one offering the sacrifice. We have three parties partaking here: the Lord, the Kohen, the priest who sprinkles the blood, and the one who brings the sacrifice. Okay, so let's go back to my 3 points from chapter 3. It's to be a perfect sacrifice. It is to be one in which the offerer is intimately involved. He slaughters it himself, and then we are to have blood on the altar. Now, if these three things are done, along with some of the other instructions here, it becomes a fellowship where the Lord partakes, the priest partakes, and the one doing the offering partakes, right? Now, this is powerful stuff. First of all, this gives us a little glimpse, maybe a big glimpse, into the very character of God. You know, it shows his desire to have fellowship with his people. And how does that fellowship happen? It happens through sacrifice. And of course, many of you know where I'm going with this, right? The sacrifice of Yeshua is very much a fellowship offering. It's one in which we partake and we have fellowship with God. Okay? We see those three things that I pointed out from chapter 3 in represented in Yeshua. A perfect offering. Yeshua was without sin. Isaiah 53 talks about how the Messiah would be offered up, would become an offering, and there would be no deceit in his mouth, right? 1 Peter chapter 2, he also points that out, that even though he was without sin, he became a sin offering. In fact, I hadn't thought of using this verse earlier, so hopefully I'll get the passage right here. 2 Corinthians 5:21, yes. He, meaning God, made the one who knew no sin to become a sin offering on our behalf. Now here it is talking about a sin offering and not the fellowship offering. Yeshua fulfills all the different types of offerings. But the point I want to draw from this is that he knew no sin, right? He was the perfect offering, okay? He fulfills the three qualifications, right now talking about the first one of being the perfect offering. He fulfills what needs to be fulfilled for us to have a fellowship offering. He made the one who knew no sin to become a sin offering on our behalf. And actually the Greek there, to become sin on our behalf, the word sin there can mean sin offering or just sin, just like it can in the Hebrew. But either way it works, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. All right, so he's perfect. He's without sin. He is like the blameless lamb being presented for the fellowship offering. Now, the second thing is that the one who offered the offering had to be intimately involved with the sacrifice itself. And here's where I fear that we get it wrong a lot of times. Where those who are believers in Yeshua, Jesus, we don't quite grasp the power of the sacrifice in our own lives because we don't understand how intimately we are to be involved in this sacrifice, okay? You'll often hear people say you have to believe that he died for your sins, and absolutely they're right, but the belief goes much deeper than we often think of in modern society. I believe something, just like I believe I had a banana with my lunch today, right? It's just I know a fact. But actually, this type of belief is to be intimately involved. Let's look at Romans chapter 6, verse 5. For if we have become joined together in the likeness of his death, certainly we also will be joined together in his resurrection. You see, it's not just I sit back and I imagine Yeshua being sacrificed and I believe it and I have the fellowship offering. No, I have to be joined together with his crucifixion. Paul also says it this way in Galatians 2, one of my favorite verses. It's so powerful. Galatians 2, verse 20, Paul says, and it is no longer I who live, but Messiah lives in me. And the life I now live in the body, I live by trusting in Ben Elohim, the Son of God, reading from the Tree of Life version, which has some of the Hebrew terminology, who loved me and gave himself for me. Okay? I'm sorry, I should have started at verse 19. Let me read verse 19. Galatians 2:19. For through law I died to law. I'm not going to get into all that today. So that I might live for God. I have been crucified with Messiah. You see that? He doesn't just say, I believe that Messiah was crucified for my sins. He says, I have been crucified with Messiah. It's like the fellowship offering. The one offering goes up with the animal, puts his hands on the head, takes his own knife and slaughters it. Now, it's that intimacy, right? The same with the sacrifice, that union with the sacrifice. In order for this to really be a fellowship offering, we have to be intimately involved, right? We have to be crucified with Messiah. Even Yeshua in Matthew chapter 16, verse 24, says, whoever would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. In other words, you're not just going to watch me take up a cross. You're going to have to take up your own cross. You're going to have to be like the thieves that were crucified on either side of me. You're going to have to be united with my death if you want to be united in my resurrection. If you really want that fellowship with God, you've got to die to self. It's not just about, I believe. It's about, I am united with his sacrifice, okay? And of course, the third thing was the importance of the blood. So we've got the perfect offering. We've got the intimacy of the offerer with the offering. And then we have the blood. And of course, it's the blood of Messiah that cleanses us from sin, cleanses us so deeply that we can... It's not just a taking away of the sins, right? It's Hebrews 9 says it this way. What is it? Hebrews 9, 13 and 14, I believe. Yes, for if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling those who have been defiled sanctify for the cleansing of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Messiah, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, there we have the without blemish again, cleanse our conscience from dead works to serve the living God. So this blood doesn't just forgive sins, it cleanses the conscience, right? And so we've got in Yeshua these three things that align with the fellowship offering, right? The perfect offering, our union with the offering itself, right? Our union with Messiah's death. And then, of course, that deep cleansing. And if we do this, what do we have? We have peace, Romans 5:1. Therefore, having been made righteous by trusting, and trusting once. Trusting what? If we go back into the previous chapter, we see his emphasis here on Yeshua's sacrifice. Okay, Romans 4:25. He was handed over for our transgressions and raised up for the sake of setting us right. Okay, setting us right. What does that mean? It means we're fellowship offering, right? Fellowship with God. We're right with God. Okay. And if we trust in this, if we're unified in this, therefore having been made righteous by trusting, we have shalom, right? And what's the root of this type of offering? That shalom word there, right? That peace offering, but peace in the understanding of a completion, a rightness, a wholeness to our fellowship with God. We partake, right? God partakes, we partake together at the same table. We have fellowship now. Therefore, having been made righteous by trusting in what? Trusting in his work for us on the cross. We have shalom with God through our Lord Yeshua, the Messiah. So let me just encourage you again to understand that God's heart is to know you. I mean, he knows all about you, of course, but to know you as a friend knows a friend, to know you as a father knows a son or daughter, right? To know you as a husband and wife, to know you in intimacy, right? And if this is something you want, right? And it is, right? It's in our soul. It's a thirst in our soul, whether we recognize it or not. I pray that you'll recognize it. Then you enter in to that fellowship with God through Yeshua the Messiah, who was our perfect offering, our perfect sin offering, our perfect peace offering, fellowship offering. That's him, right? This is God's intention, God's purpose for your life, is to live in fellowship with him. Not just to believe your sins are forgiven so one day you go to heaven, but to live in fellowship with him for all eternity. May the Lord deeply bless you. Shalom.